to me about being in the bathtub and what you thought. Okay, and don't worry about this. I won't use it in
right.
other.
Well, I'll do a little bit of a little more background. I was very fortunate growing up that I got to live in lots of different places, including overseas. So I'm 59, so I was 11, 12, 13 at the time. Actually started even earlier, 10 through 14 maybe. I was overseas. And I lived in Vancouver, Canada. I lived in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and I lived in Santiago, Chile at the time. And, the world was not as global as it is today. So travel overseas was not the norm, and none of my peers had traveled that way. So I didn't have any role models for what it was to live in different countries. And when we were in these different countries, it was so surprising to realize that the whole world didn't revolve around the United States. Because when you're in the United States, that's the way it's projected. Like we're the center of the universe and everybody follows our lead and, we set the standard and so on. And living in these countries that had really quite different cultures sometimes or worldviews and of course experiences, especially in Brazil, that the experience was so very, very different. The great divide between rich and poor was very striking in Rio. And just to have that sense of we're no longer in charge and we're not the dominant force in these people's lives. And it created a greater awareness and humility for me of learning to work with other people and be with other people and know other people. So I think that was a very formative experience. So someplace along the way, I had this epiphany that people tend to associate with a group, and then they become almost tribal in their sense of association with that group. So it could be to a family or a town or a neighborhood or a country, and that I realized that my own sense of identity was very much more expansive than that, and that I felt more connected to a sort of a universal sense of connectivity. I guess really almost to all living things, I would have to say. And I wasn't sure what to do with that. I was 10, 11, 12 at the time, but it kind of stuck with me, that sense of as others were creating more separateness and division, I tend to always see things in the more expansive and see, what are the commonalities instead of what are the differences.
It's a great visual of being a visionary, someone who has to always go beyond what's happening in the room and see what could be.
Yeah, and in later, more recent life, and as I've tried to be an agent for social benefit, I've a couple of points that I think have grown out of that. One is that I see myself as having a personal mission of connecting for world benefit, or talent scouting. That's what I call it, talent scouting for world benefit. So finding people who have a passion for something that can benefit the world, and then doing whatever I can to connect them to others, to help amplify that.
Catalyst comes to mind.
Yeah, Catalyst definitely is I used to say Catalyst is an emanation of my soul, right? That's how it came to be. It was, and actually the organization, it sort of grew and learned as I learned the organization. So it really was like an external
in your direction, right?
We learned together. But the other example, is that from a political perspective, when there's differences and conflict that seems intractable, I believe that the only way out is to go to higher ground. So to get to common ground, you have to go to higher ground. You can't get stuck on where you disagree. You have to find that point of greater agreement. And this was a quote from Reverend Jim Wallace, which I've used often: to get to common ground, we have to go to higher ground. And if you could think of it visually, and this could go back to Mitch, because Mitch Sheffitz uses this sort of visual, that, when you're on the bottom of a mountain, you could be very far apart but as you climb the mountain, you get closer and closer together.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's to me, that's the metaphor for what we need to do as a society.
So if you had to try to say you had an aha or pivotal moment, it was this rather global, universal
Yeah. It was definitely very abstract, but it did.
It led you in the directions that you wanted.
I think so. I didn't, it's not like I thought to myself, oh, how do I follow this path? But I think it helped to define and reflect for me my worldview.
And that led you to study in college. What was your undergraduate degree?
My major in college was psychology with a focus on child studies, and then went on to get graduate degrees in law and social work. But that really, let's see if I can wind that back a little bit. As I told you, I was very fortunate, even though there was discord in my family, as in most families. I lacked for nothing and was very loved and very encouraged to achieve whatever I set out to achieve, and provided a great sense of hope and encouragement for anything I wanted to do, even pushed sometimes more than I wanted to be pushed. But I did believe that, and maybe this is linked to this universality notion, that why should I be so blessed? Why shouldn't everybody have the same blessings that I have? And so I was always very driven that why should others not have access to the same love, to the same basic needs being addressed, and so on. So that drove me